If the amount of entries on my anime list wasn't indication enough, I've read a lot of manga. A good portion of that has been dedicated to the oh-so-famous romance genre, and I can't say I regret it at all. Out of the tons that I've read though, only a few of them managed to stay a cut above the rest. I would say there are two that fit that bill, and since this video isn't about Kaguya-sama, I would say that my clear favorite is Chikan Otoko, or better known by its English title... What? Yes, you did indeed read that correctly. Molester Man by Takuma Yokota is a work that firmly cements itself amongst even the most legendary stories in the romance genre, across all mediums. Despite its outrageous title and being based on a literal 2chan thread, it boasts an 8.47 rating on my anime list at the time of writing, so clearly, I'm not alone on this. So what makes Molester Man so special, you might be asking? Perhaps there are more pressing issues on your mind. Regardless of which line of questioning you might ascribe to, this video is here to answer all of that and more. With that being said, let's not waste a second more. Obviously, spoilers ahead. Molester Man starts off by explaining the title of the manga, the event that kicks off everything, the day when our MC would come to be known as Molester Man. By not doing a thing. Really, it was just a misunderstanding by misunderstanding, the girl who misunderstood Molester Man for an actual molester while they were both walking home in the same direction. A short stint at the police station, more misunderstandings are what lead into the larger plot of the story. The beginning of Molester Man actually does pretty well at setting up the relatively small supporting cast. Miss Undy's core group of friends serve as the other main characters of the story, and Molester's interactions with them are what drive the story forward. Outside of Miss Undy herself, we get to meet Kanzai and Lollyjugs, the main characters that are front and center. Alongside them are more minor characters like Glasses and Yamaoka, who don't contribute as much but make the world feel like there's more going on outside of the main story. Which, ironically, is probably because this is technically a retelling of actual events, if you believe the original thread. After the initial misunderstanding, Molester and Miss Undy meet up a few times and he starts to pursue a relationship with her after everything is cleared up. But the manga doesn't go in that direction. Relatively early on, Kanzai lets Molester know that Miss Undy isn't interested in him, and instead he goes in a different direction. Now, before I go on any further, let's talk about these names. The manga, as stated earlier, is based on the 2chan thread where, supposedly, the same things happened with some creative liberties being taken. The names of each character aren't their actual names but aliases that are given due to the anonymous nature of 2chan. Molester Man and Misunderstanding are two obvious examples that show up right at the start. Molester himself, being based on a 2chan user, also sort of sets up what to expect from him. He's an otaku, isolated, and largely stereotypical, but that's only on the surface level. Really, he's the best part about this manga.
Lester. I don't even think I have to explain why that name is so unequivocally wrong. Who thought in their heart of hearts that a guy named Molester would be able to
Molester doesn't start off as this unlovable shut-in. In fact, the first scene of the manga lets us know that he's on his way back from work. That already shatters the idea that he's a NEET, and despite his constant musings over not having any friends or not knowing what to do, he's pretty competent. Even during that initial mix-up, he isn't incapable of sticking up for himself and has a lot of conversations with a lot of people he barely knows with no real difficulty. Most of his 4chan sensibilities come from his thoughts exclusively, and he doesn't act on anything that would truly be that weird. That's one of my favorite parts about this manga, the fact that Molester is essentially just a normal dude. His character arc isn't one about growing immensely as a person, reaching towards betterment and breaking out of isolation, but one that demonstrates what just a little push can do for a person. It shows the effects that just a few people can have on someone who might not need a total transformation to make the most of his life. After he realizes Misunderstanding isn't interested in him, he doesn't shatter into a million pieces. He tries to keep his mood up and reads the room with ease. After Kanzai spends the night with him, keeping him company, and the two of them bond even more than they already have been, he takes a step back and considers his feelings for both Kanzai and Misundi, realizing the relative shallowness of his feelings towards Misundi when compared to the genuine bond he was starting to feel with Kanzai. Yeah, he got a little help there from his good old 2chan thread, but that isn't what defines his every action. It's simply a small facet of a larger picture. Molester has emotional intelligence, integrity, and is overall doing pretty well for himself as a college student. Of course, he's still human. He can make mistakes, he can say the wrong thing, but he'll still try his best to mend any situation. In spite of all that, he doesn't really give himself much credit. Given the fact that he is an otaku, he has that classic, complete lack of self-confidence that is ultimately one of his biggest flaws. That all comes to a head when Lollyjugs, who has probably been passively ignored to this point, makes a move on him.
Time to join your friends, chauffeur. Just get it over with and roll.
Molester starts to get closer to the group of girls, and despite constantly saying that he can't really interact with women, hits it off with every single one of them, quite well too. It's to the point where they're dropping by his house multiple times and even staying over. One time, with Lollyjugs over, she throws up all over herself in his bed, and he gives her a shirt that he goes to pick up later on. While at her house, she starts to make moves on him, and even though it's tempting, he sticks to his guns and declines. Later on, when she's visiting his house again, she wholly confesses, only to be shot down again by Molester, who does it in the way that he thinks is best, by telling her the whole truth behind why. Yet it still hurts her. This reveal doesn't just come out of nowhere though. She explains multiple reasons why she thought he potentially liked her, and it's things that we see throughout the manga. She mistakes his constant trips to her workplace as specifically for her rather than Kanzai or Misundi. She takes the time that they messaged each other as a sign of interest even though he wasn't thinking like that at all, and since he's been spending a lot of time with the group, she was one of the few people he was spending all of his time with. Still, this moment helps to ground Molester's thoughts back to the real world. He's forced to reason with the fact that people will simply treat him like a normal person and not a disgusting otaku freak. In fact, Lollyjugs herself bought the latest Dragon Quest game, and Kanzai really didn't mind his ramblings about more niche topics at all. He isn't this foreign entity, he's a person that lives in the same world that they do, and Lolly falling for him confirms that, not just thematically, but literally for Molester himself. Still, even a 2chan user is capable of rejecting quote-unquote 3D girls, and Molester further affirms his love for Kanzai. Now though, everything comes to a head. Before I cover the last arc, I wanted to do a further dive into Kanzai's character, the proverbial best girl of the manga, an endgame for Molester. When you start off the manga, you would probably expect her to serve the purpose of being the quirky best friend of the main love interest, the yin to her yang. However, she herself ends up being the main love interest, despite not giving off that vibe at first, but it's obvious when you read the manga knowing that fact. At the start, Molester doesn't even like her and wishes she would go off, banished to whichever pit of hell she crawled her way out of so he would be free to spit some game to Misundi, but that doesn't last for long as he finds himself warming up to her as they talk more and more. By the end of the day, they're talking super casually when juxtaposed with the way he talks to Misundi. He does manage to talk to Misundi relatively casually later on, but that's only after he's already affirmed his feelings for Kanzai and he can feel more comfortable with her. They were always going to be better as friends, but Kanzai was different. She didn't care about Molester being an otaku, kept an eye on him when she thought he might be feeling sad, spent time with him when he was locked out of his apartment, texted him when she should have been paying attention in class, went out of her way to look after him when he was sick, and so many other things that showed that she truly cared for him in a way that none of the other girls did. In a similar fashion, it was always quite obvious that Molester thought of Kanzai differently. He didn't really mind texting her informally, and they would always chat without that hint of professionalism that he needed from Misundi or Lolly. He joked with her in a way that he wouldn't with others, and even at the very start, it was obvious that they had the most chemistry. What's important to realize going into Kanzai's very long period of indecision during the final arc is that, basically this entire time, she's been viewing Molester as a friend rather than a potential boyfriend given her surprise at his confession. Her actions are not defined by any romantic interest, but rather from her wanting to be a good friend and valuing her friendships. Right at the start of the story, she's visibly pissed at Molester because she thinks that he might be Miss Undy's stalker, and later we see the lengths she'll go to for Molester when he's sick, or Lolly when she vomits, and all of these things show off how good of a friend she is. So, when she can't answer Molester's confession right away and instead prioritizes her friendship with Lolly, it makes sense. At the end of the story, Molester asks his sister if she would pick romance or friendship if it came down to it, and without skipping a beat, his sister decides on romance, but even she says that this might depend on person to person. Kanzai is a person that values her friendship over romance, and she doesn't compromise that value even if it would hurt her. One thing I think that the manga realizes though is that love is inevitably going to be a stronger feeling than friendship for most people, regardless of whether they would actively choose it over their own friendships. In a way, I find myself relating to that sentiment. In my personal life, I've usually always chosen to take a step back from any romantic pursuit if it meant that someone I knew, or heck, even someone that I didn't know, was able to find happiness where I was seeking it. The thing is, over time I've come to realize that this really isn't the best or healthiest option for a person. A few years ago, I wrote a short story that tried to tackle my feelings on the topic, and even if it's not my greatest writing contribution to the planet, I do think it expressed that theme pretty well. And from Kanzai's blush after Molester says that he cares about her the most, I think it's pretty obvious how strong those emotions are for her, and how difficult deciding against it truly would be. Molester's final test in the manga is really a test of will. How badly will you fight for the things that you want? What's great about this is the fact that he does indeed have a limit. He's not this endlessly motivated, perfect shonen protagonist. He's a real person who has to draw boundaries. He pushes himself more than he ever would have without meeting these people, but not out of the bounds of reality. He gets rejected multiple times and he ultimately finds himself accepting that he might not get with Kanzai. He meets up with Lolly, asking them to make up, hoping that it might lead to something, but not with the intention to keep pushing on from there. After he talks to Lolly, he does leave it there. He intends to stop talking with the group because of all the problems he's indirectly caused and wishes them well. There's no bitterness or tragedy to it, he just wasn't able to get the girl. But that's fine though, right? You won't always succeed and life still moves on. Even though it's obviously sad, it's not the end of the world. Right after this, he meets up with his family and they see the lights of the new year together. He's not alone. Kanzai wasn't the end-all be-all of his life, and he still has more outside of her, and outside of that chapter of his life. Whether it be his family, his trusted partner Sachiko, fellow Vippers, or whoever else was there right along with him. So, when our couple eventually does get together, it's not the light that pulls Molester from the darkness. It's cathartic, sure, but it's not the thing that he needed to get back on his feet. He already was on his feet. In fact, I'd say he was on his feet the entire manga. Just instead of dragging them on the ground, he can take each step individually. A slightly improved person with just a little help from the right people, or in this case, the right person. Molester Man is a story about what one tiny push can do to change a person. We don't start with a broken man, and most people in this world aren't broken anyways. Any average person might just be a small step away from their life changing for the better. Joining a club, learning an instrument, leaving the house, any small change to a life can reap massive benefits that maybe you would never have guessed could happen. How would you know if you didn't try though, right? At the very least, it's worth a shot. Oh my god, it's my second video. Initially I was going to make a Down the Rabbit Hole 1, but then I decided to read a lot of the prerequisites that come with that, and it's been taking a while. I am even going to read Sui no Sora Remake before I get into that, so that's going to be a bit. And college starts soon. In fact, it probably has started by the time I release this video, so I don't know how fast that'll be. I'll still try to make this other video. I have at least 2 other ideas for video essays, sorry. Yeah, but Down the Rabbit Hole is maybe going to be the next one, who knows. But I'll definitely make another one. And I'll still try and get that Underrune Chapter 3 remake, I think. That's what I'm doing next. Yeah, but basically, drop a like if you enjoyed the video, and if you haven't already, go read Molester Man.